The story does not begin with a sharp strike, but with the heavy quiet that comes just before it. The air on this Texas plantation felt thick, not only from the crushing heat that hung over the cotton fields, but from the silent strain of a system built on enslaved lives. It was a place of harsh and disturbing contrasts. The soft, steady hum of cicadas hidden in the wide branches of live oak trees clashed with the cold metallic sound of chains. The sweet, almost overpowering smell of magnolia flowers mixed uneasily with the sharp stink of fear and sweat that filled the living quarters. Life here was a carefully controlled show of normal behavior, hiding a base of deep cruelty. We know painfully little about the woman at the center of this terrible story. Historical records, often detailed yet deeply cruel to the enslaved, have wiped away her name. Her identity was buried in the quiet vaults of the forgotten. Still, we can sense her spirit through the actions that led to her punishment and through the strength that would later define her. She was not someone who accepted her fate quietly. Maybe her offense was a long, defiant look, held just a moment too long, a silent challenge a powerful man could not tolerate. Maybe she spoke a simple truth that could not be denied, or she was caught trying to claim the most basic human right, the right to read, to be alone for a moment, or simply to imagine freedom. Whatever the offense, real or invented by the fearful mind of her enslaver, she had drawn the burning attention of a man who believed completely that he owned the power of life and death over those he called his property. On that day, the fragile balance of the plantation broke apart. The usual brutal routine of forced work stopped. A sharp tension moved through the cotton rows like a sudden bad wind. Quiet whispers traveled from person to person, spreading dread without words. The master was furious, not loud but cold and boiling inside, a kind of anger everyone knew to stay away from. This time his rage fixed itself firmly on her. The punishment he chose was not a sudden act of wild violence. It was planned and filled with meaning. He was a man proud of his control, not only over people, but over nature itself. He kept beehives with careful, almost unsettling care. Now he would turn nature, this world of work and sweet reward he admired, into his weapon. It twisted the natural order and showed his absolute power. The beehive was chosen. A structure known for shared labor and golden sweetness would become a tool of long, focused suffering. Once the decision was made, it was carried out with a chilling, orderly precision that showed a mind used to giving final commands. There was no rushed anger in the overseer's actions, only grim efficiency, as men enforcing a sentence they believed was justified. The woman was taken not with wild chaos, but with a hard, practiced grip. Her hands were tied, not with rough rope used for animals, but with strips of smooth, hardened leather. This choice was deliberate. Leather, soaked with sweat, would not break or fray the way rope might under long strain. It was a small detail that exposed the cold planning behind the act, an intent for the bonds to last as long as the body inside them. She was then marched across the sun-baked ground of the plantation, guarded by stern-faced men. They did not head toward the familiar whip. Ping post, a sight that alone could silence a field of workers. Instead, they moved toward the edge of the land, where neat cotton rows faded into wild growth. There, in a small clearing dotted with sunlight and filled with a steady hum, stood a line of beehives. Other workers were forced to stop their labor and gather to watch. This was more than punishment. It was a lesson in fear, a public display designed to burn away any spark of resistance in their hearts. The message was plain. Defiance would be answered not only with pain but with cruel, symbolic suffering that twisted the world around them. As they came closer to the hives, the air began to change. The calm hum that usually surrounded the apiaries shifted in tone. It grew sharper and more restless, turning into a rough, angry buzz. The bees, highly sensitive to vibration and distress, sensed something was wrong. They felt the fear, the anger, the heavy expectation coming toward them as a threat to their ordered world. The air itself seemed to vibrate with rising alarm. She was pushed back against the largest hive. The wooden surface was hard and rough against her back, the grain pressing into her skin through her thin clothing. The straps were tightened, wrapped around the hive and her wrists, binding her to the very tool meant to destroy her. In that moment, a flood of feeling must have threatened to crush her. A cold fear spread from her stomach outward. Her heart hammered wildly in her chest like a trapped bird. A raw instinct screamed for her to run, to fight, to cry out. All of it was held down by the tight leather and the solid presence of her captors. Her world narrowed to this single point, this place where pain was about to begin. The master stepped forward. In his hands were tools from his beekeeping work, now turned dark in purpose. The smoker, meant to calm bees by copying the warning of fire, was used instead to anger them. He worked the bellows in sharp, harsh bursts, filling the air with bitter smoke. Then he struck the hive several times with a stick, sharp and loud, like the attack of an animal. This was not care. It was deliberate provocation. The reaction was instant and horrifying. The rough hum exploded into a roaring sound. Guard bees rushed out, bodies tilted forward, antennae searching for danger. More followed, then dozens, then hundreds, until a dark moving cloud poured from the hive. The air around her filled with wings and rage, a storm of tiny armored forms. The first sting hit her arm like sudden fire, then another struck her neck, another her cheek. Soon the pain stopped feeling separate and became one burning wave. Each sting added fresh venom, each one another point of agony. Her body, once strong and living, was being reshaped into a map of suffering. Every swelling mark formed a new line on a landscape of pain. The sound was unbearable, a high buzzing that filled her ears and seemed to shake her bones, drowning out every other thought until only heat and noise remained. Medical science would later describe this as massive envenomation. The human body can only endure so much of the poison in honeybee venom. For most people, a few hundred stings would be enough to cause total system failure. Blood pressure would collapse. Kidneys would shut down under the load of toxins. Death would usually follow. The amount of venom in her blood should have ended her life. But the human spirit does not always follow the rules of biology. It moves by different laws, where will can sometimes change what should happen. Inside her, a desperate silent battle was being fought. Her heart struggled against the poison, beating fast and hard. Her lungs fought to pull in air as her throat and chest began to swell. Each breath was a conscious effort, a shallow victory against pressure. Her nerves became channels for one overwhelming message of pain. The sharp fires of each sting blended into a deep, pulsing agony that moved with her heartbeat, a full sigh. Symphony of suffering carried by venom. Yet this was more than a physical reaction. It was a fight for her own mind. With every sting, part of her awareness pulled back, escaping the cage of her body. It searched for a place pain could not reach, built from memory and pure strength of mind. Perhaps she walked beside a river from childhood, the water cool and clear against the burning of her skin. Maybe she heard part of a song, a lullaby from a mother she barely remembered. Maybe she held onto the image of someone she loved, a friend, a fellow worker, a single human face in the firestorm. Her mind became her refuge, a fortress under attack but still standing, even as her body remained tied to the hive. The men watching from afar saw only a body twisting, what they thought were the final movements before death. They saw struggle and assumed surrender was near. They could not see the unbreakable core of someone refusing to give up. They believed they were watching a flame go out. They did not understand they were watching something harder being formed. Hours passed. The sun slowly sank, painting the Texas sky with deep orange and purple. As the air cooled, the bees' fury faded. Their duty was done. The threat was gone. The swarm thinned, many bees returning to the hive. Quiet returned, broken only by a low hum and her harsh breathing. She was still bound. Her body was swollen and damaged, pain now deep and constant instead of sharp. It wrapped around her like a heavy cloak, but beneath it one truth remained. She was alive. Her awareness, shaken but present, had not disappeared. From the chaos, one strong thought formed, the need to survive. As darkness fell and the air cooled, something began to change. Under the cover of night, a quiet act of human will began. The leather straps, once tight and firm, had soaked up sweat and night air. They had stretched just slightly. That tiny looseness was the only weakness in her prison. Her hands were swollen and numb, pain flashing with every movement. Still, she found a deep reserve of strength, not from muscle but from spirit. Slowly, carefully, she began to work against the bonds. She did not pull hard. She twisted her wrist just a fraction, leather scraping against injured skin, pain flaring white hot. She paused, breathing through it. Then she twisted again. Another tiny gain, almost too small to feel. It was a harsh math of pain weighed against freedom. Every slight movement was a chosen risk, a quiet bet placed on the chance of a future. Time stopped having meaning in the dark. It was no longer counted in hours or minutes, but in cycles of pain and rest, in the slow, stubborn loosening of the knot. Her whole world narrowed to the space between her wrists and the hive, to the feel of the leather slowly, steadily giving way under the constant pressure of her will. The need to be free, older and stronger than any master or any swarm, guided her forward. It ruled her completely, driving her broken bee, Odie, onward. After what felt like an entire lifetime of this silent, punishing effort, something finally changed. With one last twisting motion that tore a cry from her throat and brought tears to her eyes, one hand slipped free. The feeling was so sudden and unreal that she froze, her mind struggling to accept what had happened. The release of pressure sent a rush of blood into her wrist, a shock that was both relief and a new sharp pain. Encouraged by this miracle, her freed hand, stiff and clumsy, reached for the second binding. Her fingers felt swollen and useless, like thick dead weight, as they clawed at the wet leather. Progress was painfully slow, but now the end was close. With one final rough pull, the second strap gave way. Her body, no longer held upright by the hive, folded forward and collapsed onto the cool, wet ground. The touch of the earth against her burning skin felt almost holy. It was real, alive, and gentle compared to the cruel tools that had held her. For a moment she lay there, her face pressed into the dirt, breathing in the smell of soil and decay. Every breath hurt, but every breath also proved she was alive. Still, the danger was not over. Her muscles screamed as she forced herself up onto her hands and knees. Even holding her own weight felt impossible. Her vision blurred, dark spots drifting at the edges. She moved like a shadow, a thing made of pain slipping through the darkness of the place meant to be her grave. She did not look back at the hive standing silent against the stars. There was no space left for anger or memory, only movement. At first she dragged herself, her limbs barely obeying. Each motion sent fresh pain through her body. She stumbled, fell, rose again. Slowly her body remembered how to stand. She pulled herself upright, swaying like a young tree in a hard wind. Then, with one final act of will, she disappeared into the deep, hiding darkness of the wild Texas land, leaving behind only the quiet hive and discarded leather straps. For her captors, her absence the next morning made no sense. In the clear light of day they found the empty bonds and no body. Their minds, shaped by cruelty, could not accept the truth. They saw no signs of animals, no marks of a dragged body. So they decided she must have been taken by predators after the bees were done. In their thinking, the bees had passed the sentence and nature had finished the job. The idea that a woman could survive such an attack, free herself and walk away was beyond what they could imagine, so they closed the matter, believing her story had ended. They were terribly wrong. She was gone, leaving not a body but a false story of death, a ghost they had created and released. For 7 days and 7 nights she became that ghost, moving through a land that was both her shelter and her healer. The wilderness, which others feared, became a place of order and recovery for her. Distance was her first goal. She pushed her damaged body far past its limits, driven by the last traces of fear from her old life. Every broken twig sounded like a hunter. Every animal cry felt like discovery. By day she moved under thick trees, silent as a shadow. At night she crossed open ground only when she had no choice, her body barely visible against the pale grass. The land was harsh. Thorns tore at her clothes, rocks cut into her swollen feet. But every painful step proved her separation from the world that had tried to destroy her. Survival became a moment-by-moment bargain with nature. Thirst burned her throat constantly. She learned to read the land, finding water not in large rivers, but in small signs, greener plants, shallow dips where rain gathered. She licked dew from wide leaves in the morning. Hunger twisted her stomach. Whatever knowledge she carried, learned long ago or shared in whispers, now saved her. She found dark clusters of wild grapes, sharp and sour. She gathered prickly pear fruit, carefully avoiding the spines. She dug roots from the ground with bare hands until her fingers were raw. Nature gave her what she needed, but only if she worked for it. She ate to survive, not to enjoy, each bite restoring a small piece of her strength. As the days blurred together, her body slowly began to heal. The terrible swelling from the tings faded little by little. Sharp pains softened into a deep ache, then into intense itching as skin repaired itself. The welts changed from angry red into pale raised marks, permanent reminders written across her body. Each mark told part of her story. She had become a living record of suffering and survival. But the deepest change was not in her body. It happened quietly in her mind. Those 7 days alone broke down who she had been and reshaped her. The woman tied to the hive had lived under another's will. That person was fading now. The constant fear that once ruled her burned away, spent by the truth of her survival. In its place grew something colder and sharper, purpose. Not wild anger, but focused intent. Sitting by a small stream, watching insects move across the water, she understood something new. The bees were not her enemy. They were nature, acting on instinct. They had been used, and what could be used could be turned. This realization changed everything. She had tea only healed, she had learned. The world was no longer just a place where pain happened to her. It was a place of forces and tools, and she was learning to use them. The buzzing that once meant only agony now meant power. A power that failed to break her. A power she now understood. On the 8th day, as the sun rose through the trees, a figure stepped from the forest. It was her, yet not the same. Her body bore the marks of suffering, but her movements were calm and deliberate. Hunger and pain had stripped away softness, leaving sharp lines and steady purpose. She did not hide at the edge of the trees. She stood in the open, looking at the plantation. The house still stood. The field still moved with forced labor. Life continued as if nothing had happened. The plantation was unready for her return. It believed in its own control, a control she had already broken. She did not come back for belongings or closure. She came back for one reason: justice. Cold, careful, personal justice. She had learned the wind, the plants, the bees. As evening fell, she moved again toward the apiaries, not as a victim, but as a planner. She watched, waited, and prepared. What happened next became legend. Details blurred over time, but the heart of the story stayed true. Using patience and knowledge, she turned the swarm into a message, not to kill, but to terrify and reveal truth. When morning came, the bees rose as one and struck the heart of the plantation. Chaos followed. The pain inflicted echoed her own. Power was reversed. From a hidden place, she watched. She felt no joy, only calm certainty. The buzzing was no longer her suffering, it was her voice. The story spread far and wide. A woman meant to die had lived, returned, and answered cruelty with consequence. She was never caught. No record held her again. Her body vanished, but her story grew. She became proof that a spirit can survive, transform, and speak back. And her story still asks us what the human will can endure, and what injustice truly costs.